This conference will now be recorded.
Okay, amazing. So first of all, just welcome again, everyone, for joining us for our November roundtable. It's November 24th. I was just thinking about that this morning, like 1 month, basically 1 month till Christmas. So time is definitely ticking. The topic for this month um, came to be because we tend to get a lot of questions around, well, the whole what activity should I do? And I know some of you on the call with us today are aware we have some resources in place to help with that. We have our library of lessons, we have a program guide. You can obviously find stuff on Google, and there's other external resources that are wonderful, but it can be a bit overwhelming to find something, create something, and create the kind of experience you're looking for in the class. So one of the practices that has been really helpful and successful from my personal point of view, and anytime I'm able to go in and do an activity, and from feedback we've received from some of our other volunteers, is when we can essentially scale an activity up or scale an activity down. So you can start with an idea, find it in one of those places I mentioned, and then think about ways to adapt it for older students or younger students. So I guess first thing I'm curious about is, has anyone done this? Have you tried this out? Taking an idea, an activity to start with, and modifying it in some way to meet your particular needs? No, not yet.
I'm still waiting to get into the class, so
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
not just yet.
Yeah. Don?
Well, I pretty much run them the way I found them on the net, although I tailor them, I guess, to what I feel comfortable with presenting, kind of thing, more than anything, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's that part of it too, where you take something that exists and pretty much run it as is, but maybe add in your own personal style, I will say, like your own personal stories, your own relevant experience in some cases, to personalize it, to help
Mhm.
create that connection. I think that's a really important part as well.
Because I know a lot of the lessons that are like on that Teach Engineering site, I think it's called.
Yep.
They sound more like a homework activity, like write an essay of what your experience was.
Yeah.
Have to, they have to prepare reports and prepare budgets of what they're going to do, and
Yeah.
I tend to skip all that. But yeah.
Yeah, kind of pick and choose the pieces that you want to use to create the experience you want to have in the class, right?
Hmm.
Yeah. Well, I thought I would maybe just start by telling a little bit about what I did this week. So, um, I was really lucky to be able to be invited into my own kids' school. And I was told that the teacher had just, I think, just finished, or they were maybe just wrapping up a lesson on water systems. I knew that it was a grade 8 class. I knew the unit was water systems. And in the email exchange, they had specifically asked for water filtration. So for me, lots of light bulbs went off, and there is an amazing water filtration activity that I am familiar with, and I've done it in bits and pieces in the past, called Water for the World. And this particular activity, has anyone heard of Water for the World before I explain it? No? So Water for the World was designed by an Engineers Without Borders chapter, the Toronto Pro Engineers Without Borders chapter. So for those who may not be aware, Engineers Without Borders Canada has student chapters in universities all across Canada. But there are a few places where they have professional chapters set up. So once these people that have been in the student chapters graduate and go on with their careers, they want to still stay connected to that work. And so they have set up a pro chapter. I think there's one in Toronto and maybe one in Calgary, if I'm not mistaken. So the Toronto Pro chapter, years and years ago, they put together this program called Water for the World. And what they used to do is launch it, or I guess execute it, during National Engineering Month every year, which is March, for those of you who might not be aware. And they, because they're the Toronto chapter, they partnered with the Toronto Public Library, and they would bring engineers and classes together and do this really fun workshop on building a water filtration system. The target there was like kind of grades 6 to 8. And it was really well received. Obviously, there's lots of logistical challenges when you're trying to do all that coordination, but lots of really, really good feedback. So over the years, we've gotten to know them really well. We were, Engineers of Tomorrow was pretty heavily involved in National Engineering Month for a period of time. And so we've worked with them, we've helped them find volunteers. So I'm pretty familiar with the workshop. And over the years too, the workshop itself has innovated, I guess. I don't know what the right word is there. They've modified it to just keep it current, and also meet the needs of the changing education system. So one of the biggest things they did last year, I think it was last year or the year before, was they did sorry, my dog is right beside me. You can hear. They did a pretty big overhaul and adapted it so it was a lot easier to do it in a virtual environment if the in-person stuff was not possible. So all that to say, I've got all these great resources available. The teachers have asked me to come in and do this program, I guess, lesson activity. And so I knew kind of what my criteria were, right? Grade 8 water filtration. So I had a look at what they were, the new stuff they had put out, and I'm going to actually share my screen so that you can see it too. Bear with me. Okay, there we go. So actually, I'm going to go back to this tab here so you can see. So they actually created this with us in mind, because we've been working with them so closely over the years. So and this is just a really wonderful example of how they've taken this idea of building a water filter, and they've kind of already done the work for us to scale it for different age groups. So if you can see in this folder, they have the K to 2 folder, 3 to 5 folder, 6 to 8 folder. Those are representing the different grades. And then there's like a volunteer package with some extra information. So the grade 6 to 8 one, I told you I was going into grade 8 class. So I was able to use this presentation pretty much like plug and play type thing, like you were saying, Don. I was able to just kind of use it as is. But this is really designed for the virtual experience. And I was back in person, so I had to do like the reverse. I had to like think about, oh, how am I going to adapt this now for an in-person type experience? And what I ended up coming up with was a 2-visit model. So they were okay with me coming on one day, doing this presentation, which is a little less hands-on and interactive. And then on day 2, I'll tell you about what I did. But before I get into that, I just wanted to show this to you. So this is the presentation. They've got it set up in a way where like you can add your presenter information. So in this particular case, I put pictures of myself. Like I've had a picture of me at the Iron Ring or after the Iron Ring ceremony. I had a picture of me with my family. I had a picture of me on a trip that my husband and I took, just to like provide some context and help them feel connected to me. Now, it was my kids' school, so most of them knew me already. We're in a smaller town, and they're like, oh, you're Daniel's mom. Okay. But just to also help them with that idea of, you know, engineers go beyond just being engineers. Like, they like to ski, they have pets, they have kids, they have families, that sort of thing. They were able to see that in the pictures. And then this particular version of Water for the World is essentially a true false game. So there are some embedded videos that I was able to just click on and play, and then following the videos, we played, they called it Name the Mistake game. So we just asked them, you know, basically true false. Just ask them a question, and out of what they would have just watched in the video, have a bit of a conversation of like, well, what does that mean, and why is that happening? But to add some complexity to this and enhance the in-person experience, what I then decided to do was use this kind of the day one visit as more of a lead up. And then I came back again on day two, and I did the original version of the Water for the World activity. And I don't, oh, hang on, bear with me for a sec, and I'll share that screen with you. So the original version of the activity, the students are basically broken out into teams or groups. Let me say groups, not teams. They're broken out into groups, and ideally they're broken out into 6 groups, and each group is assigned a country. And one of the things I love the most about this particular, the design of this particular activity, is it goes beyond just the math and science of building a filter. And there's this added layer of the country that you're assigned. So the students have to purchase the materials to buy their filter. And one of the ways they add complexity to this particular activity is by giving different groups different amounts of money based on the GDP of the country that they're representing. Okay, one second, I'll flip over my screen sharing. It's here. There we go. So this is like I would say a more traditional lesson plan activity. So it lists like, these are the materials you would need. They're really good. They give you suggestions on where to find them, but it's pretty readily available stuff. And then you could, hopefully you can see if it's big enough on the screen there, but these are the different countries. So there's United States, Canada, South Africa, Cameroon, Ghana, and Malawi. And the amounts of money the teams get ranges from $1,000 down to $20. So if I'm thinking about this in the context of the grade, so I'm working with a grade 8 class, I basically kept this as is. But if I was gonna do it with a younger group, maybe grade 4 or 5, something like that, then I might take that part away and just focus on the filter building a little more, like remove that element of the challenge of only having $20 to get your materials. Maybe everybody gets equal amounts, something like that, right? So when you're looking at an activity, I really encourage you to think about how you can add complexity or remove complexity to adapt it for different grades. And the more that you do that or practice that, it gets, I found anyways, it gets a lot easier to think about how you can simplify it or add in complexity. Another good tip is having a backup plan or a plan for those students that are even within a class, because even within this one grade 8 class, I know that there's going to be some students that are going to struggle with this activity a little more, and then other students that this activity is going to be a breeze for them. So I brought another sort of side thing that they could do if they finished early, something that, thinking about ways that you can kind of keep students engaged, like the more advanced students maybe, if they finish early. So maybe you get them involved in running the store, or like I did, have another small activity on the side that if they finish early, they can do. So like I said, we did this as is. It worked really, really well with this particular grade 8 class. I always find this activity really neat to see the dynamics that happen in the class. I've seen everything from stealing and cheating to try and get the materials and resources they need. This particular class, I also use the teacher to help me decide which group of students was assigned which country. So I explained to her in advance, like, United States obviously is going to be a lot easier. They have more money, they have better instructions. You know the students best. You decide which group of students gets which country assigned to them. So this one was really neat. The group that got assigned the United States had all this money, like they didn't know what to do with it. And you see this transition happen during this activity where the students go from like realizing they have way more than they need or they don't have enough, and then kind of getting past that and going, well, now what? Now what can we do? And so the United States group came up to me and said, are we allowed to donate materials to other groups? And I was like, absolutely, of course, like you can do that. So they instead of just giving their money away, they went and purchased extra materials and then went to some of the other groups or countries that they knew had less money and donated things to them. So it's really neat to kind of see how that plays out. And the other fun aspect to this activity is in the instructions. So the GDP comes into play with the amount of money they get, but the other thing that comes into play is the literacy rate of the country. So for countries that have higher literacy rates, they get really clear instructions. They look like this, like it's a one page, tells them written instructions and a diagram of what to do. But for countries with lower literacy rates, sorry, I'll scroll fast, so it might make you dizzy here. So countries with lower literacy rates get something like this. So they get a bunch of symbols that they can't read in the instructions, so they're having to rely on just their own knowledge or the diagram, or maybe they go over and ask United States for some help, that sort of thing. So it's really neat to have a conversation afterwards, and those after conversations I find are a really good place again to scale things with younger students and older students. So in this particular class, we were able to have a conversation about these kinds of challenges and how you can work with other countries, or why were your instructions garbled, and talk about literacy rates and what that means and the impact of that. And then again, to simplify it, maybe we don't give them the garbled instructions. Maybe everybody gets the easier to read instructions. So those are just some of the ways that you can adapt. I've been kind of downloading all this information. Let me pause for a minute and see if there's any questions or comments or other thoughts that kind of triggered for you.
I really like the point you brought up about getting in touch with the teacher. Like you said, they know the students, so it's not, you get more out of the event by almost, I don't want to say cherry picking, but you know what I mean. Making sure it's done with intention.
It makes a big difference, and I really encourage all EIRs to think about that partnership you have with the teacher. Like, they do have a role to play. Aminat, you were talking about your teachers and they're feeling so overwhelmed and thinking like, how are they going to prepare for all this? That's your part. You can take care of the preparations. Like, I showed up to the school with a bin full of all the materials. I got there early so I could set it all up, organize it. I took care of that. But they do have an expertise, right? They have a role to play in this experience. So let's let's leverage their skills. And so by doing that, we make sure overall, then everyone's kind of gonna get the best out of it, right? So good point. Thanks, Evan. Dawn, you're not muted. Did you have something to add?
Yeah, how long does this last, or do you have?
Oh yeah, good question. Yeah, so that was the other kind of constraint I was dealing with. I'm like, okay, so what's my timing? So I had, let's see, class was from 11:50. I had 50 minutes each day. So that was something else that I was keeping in mind when I was designing this experience. I knew day one was mostly just them listening to me. I was talking more at them and watching a screen. And so 50 minutes, I mean, probably for you and I, that's not such a big deal, but it's going to be boring for kids to sit there, even in grade 8. Like I knew this particular class. I was fortunate enough to have some local insight into it. Some of them are friends of my son's. So I knew there's some really sporty kids in there. They don't want to sit still and just listen to someone talking at them for all that time, right? So for the first day, because I knew it was going to be more heavily weighted that way, I did a fun icebreaker with them, and I made it so that they had to get up and move around. So it was a simple kind of yes/no game where they were each given a different card, and each card represented a different kind of engineering, or some of them were like technicians, technologists, different jobs. And then we just asked yes or no questions about, like, do you think your engineer uses tools? And yes, go to that side of the room. No, go to that side of the room. And filled up some of the time on the first day that way. On the second day, I knew, okay, this is the hands-on day, and time can get away from you on the hands-on days. So I didn't even put anything on the screen. I didn't want them to sit and listen to me talking at all. I wanted as much time as possible for them to be doing hands-on. So they walked in, that we were doing this in like their learning commons area, the resource area. So they walked in and I introduced the activity. I was like, okay, like these are the instructions, basically 5 minutes and then go. And then just kind of watch the clock, gave them some warnings like, okay, 10-minute warning. In 10 minutes, we're going to test all your filters. 5-minute warning, 1-minute warning. And even then we still kind of ran out of some time. We had to go a little bit quick, but keeping that in mind is really important, Don. Yeah. So I was able to do this full activity in 50 minutes. Any other questions, thoughts on scaling of activities? I thought it would be helpful to just kind of show you in practice what it's looked like for me. Does anyone have maybe an activity they're thinking of, and we could chat about how might you scale it or adapt it? I know you've done some, Don, right?
Yeah. I think they, like, I have grade 5s. I think they're maybe in the middle of the road of complexity. Like, I
Yeah.
think I did some stuff that was involved some instrumentation and involved manipulating an app on a phone, and no problems there.
The neat thing too is, like, because you're with that same class, you can get a sense of their level, right? Because even though it's grade 5 and there's certain standards for the different grades, each class is going to be different. So I like what you're saying. Like, now you've got a sense of their capability, and you'll start to get to know, even within the class, like some students are going to be faster, some are going to struggle more. So you can start thinking about fine tuning your approaches each time, maybe.
Yeah. Well, actually, my next activity I'm thinking of doing is the newspaper tower challenge.
Mm-hmm.
I know what you see in terms of instructions is essentially you just give constraints to the students and then give them a pile of paper or masking tape, and then they go at it. my thought was to, I guess, maybe engineer it up a bit, and actually I have some stuff here.
Oh yeah.
I used to do like this is a 3-point bend test kind of thing.
Oh.
To actually test the different beams they'll be making out of newspaper,
Oh, neat.
and actually start getting into the way you roll up the paper can change the strength you get out of it. Like, do you roll it up orthogonally, or if you actually roll it up in a diagonal, the strength goes up by about 30% in the newspaper.
Oh, that's really, I didn't know that.
Uh,
That's really neat. I bet grade
yeah.
fives would be able to connect to that, like thinking about that
Um,
idea.
well, they learned about simple machines and levers, and the concept of making the central section thicker and tapering out is sort of related to levers. Like it's
Hmm.
the strength of this lever arm is shorter than the lever arm in the middle, kind of thing. So it has to be stronger in the middle. So if you put more
Do
material
their
in the middle, it makes it
do their
stronger.
newspaper towers have to hold anything, or is it like is it a
Um,
height challenge you're giving them, or
yeah,
what's the context?
yeah, that's what I'm still working out. Is I haven't done it yet, so I'm thinking it'll be a combination of height and then having to support a weight.
Hmm.
There's
Are you
things like
gonna
you can
are
add
you,
internal stiffeners inside the tube.
yeah.
That's something I haven't. This is one tube here, and you sort of put smaller tubes inside that can stiffen
Yeah.
it.
Yeah,
So the
yeah.
whole thing is.
Are
So
you gonna
there.
throw them any curveballs, Don? Like, are you
Uh,
going to be like, oh no, natural disaster. Now your towers have to withstand strong winds from the west. I don't know.
yeah, yeah. We'll see. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah.
That's always fun to do. I did that a little bit with my water filter session yesterday. Part of it was on purpose, part of it was because I was running out of materials. But I talked about I really only had enough materials to for each group to build the filter exactly as described. And I know sometimes what could happen is one team might purchase multiple, like they might not follow the design basically. And so I was worried. I was like, oh, what if I run out of materials? And then I realized, oh, well, I can just turn that into a problem they have to solve. So at one point, I kind of teams were coming up or groups were coming up, and I put my hands up. I'm like, I'm sorry, we're out of stock of that material. So now you need to figure out how to adapt. As engineers, we don't have, limitless resources available to us. You have to figure that out. And one of the and because I was worried that it was going to happen, I threw in I had a bag of cotton batting sitting out, so I threw that in, and that's not one of the materials that's in the original design of the activity, but I thought, oh, that would work in a filter. So I threw it in, and they saw it there, and they were asking. I was like, no, 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 that's not part of the store. And then about halfway through the activity, I sort of put my hands up and yelled. I was like, hey, everyone, like another, like, something has happened, and the store now has a new shipment of this special new material. You have access to it, and I like made up a price for it. So it was a fun way to um, just like I was asking you, Don, like kind of throw them some curveballs. And if you see again, like you can kind of almost customize that too. Like if you see there's teams that are or groups or individuals that are getting ahead or having too easy of a time, you can just throw those curveballs at them too. That's always kind of fun. I would suggest though not going the other way. So add curveballs. Don't make things easier for teams that are struggling. That we know just based on research is in terms of like growth mindset and all that kind of work is ends up making those kids feel like, oh, you don't believe in me. Oh, you think I can't do it, kind of thing. But neat. I'm excited to hear how that goes.
Yeah. Well, I guess in putting that lesson together, there was always that I guess the original design is, it's okay to fail, and maybe you set them up to fail, and then they'll learn that,
Yeah.
okay, there's other aspects of, making triangles as opposed to squares and all that. But I guess my point is to sort of give as much knowledge to them before they actually start making stuff. Maybe I guess they'll be failing in some ways, but
Yeah.
not to fail completely.
Yeah. I think like that's a bit of a balance too, right, Don? The amount of knowledge you give them in advance, because some kids will sit there and they will soak that all up. Like I was one of those kids, like sitting in school, I'm like, yep, tell me more, I'm soaking. Other kids are like, it's in one ear out the other. They're like, just let me get my hands on it, I'll figure it out as I go. So there's like, as you get to know your class and like think about that balance too, right? Like how much knowledge are we going to give them? How much are we're going to let them figure out on their own? Because in the end, they're still going to learn it, right? And because you can kind of plan it that way too. If you don't get to talk about everything initially, you can cover that in kind of your wrap up discussion at the end. Like, oh, I see some teams really struggled with this. Well, this is why, this is what we've learned because of that. And I really like how you've integrated into that activity. You have the like beam tester, because instead of now testing and getting your whole tower to fail, you can kind of like do mini tests before, right?
Mhm.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. My dog is not behaving. She wants out. So what does she get? She got something. She's being naughty. Um, Excellent. Okay, well, what else can I tell you? Any other questions about adding complexity, removing complexity? Do you have like other questions? I know, Evan and Amanat, you haven't gone in and done an activity with your class. Do you have something you're thinking of? I'm gonna go mobile just to deal with my silly dog while you're while you're talking.
So I have a question. The class that I'll be like I'm EIR for, it's grade 4 and 5 together. So like
Yep.
I asked the teachers to help me like so that I can figure out what activities I can like do with them. I asked
Yep.
them to give me like a curriculum overview of when they're finishing what lesson so I can
Mm-hmm.
kind of align. Is that the right thing that I'm doing? And I did go through like our library, but I'm still like so like confused on what activities to do.
Yeah, that I think that's a good place to start. Ask them just for the subject or the unit that they're working on. And I would say a lot of times, like you can adapt activities to different units as well. So the one I'm showing is pretty specific to like water systems. But a lot of times the activities are a little bit more cross-curricular. So you can take something and just focus on whatever it is that they have just covered or are in the process of covering. I'll use, now this is a bigger activity or program or project, but I'll use this as an example because it's coming up. There's a program called the Future City Experience. You maybe have heard me talk about it before or maybe seen it posted on Discord or some of the other places. And in this particular program, the students have to design, imagine, and build a model of a city 100 years in the future. And the particular theme for this year's program is living on the moon. So I know here in Ontario, space is in the grade 6 curriculum. So a lot of teachers are like, oh, yay, like that's in my curriculum. But I would argue that you could apply that activity to other curriculum units as well. So you could focus in on structures and then think about, okay, well, what would we have to think about to build things on the moon? So you can take that idea and just apply it to that part of the project, if that makes sense. The Future Cities one is really nice because you can kind of there's so many different ways you can go. It's a city, right? There's people in it. They are, you know, they need power, electricity. There's structures. There's infrastructure. Like it's really wide open if you just start kind of getting creative. But I think in terms of like knowing your teachers are feeling a bit overwhelmed and you're there to help them, I like your approach. Like let them know, okay, tell me what the unit is. I'm going to come up with some ideas. And then what I like to do is then bounce those ideas off the teacher. Like, here's what I'm thinking. So even for the program I just did at my kids' school, I got back to them. I said, listen, I have this awesome activity. This is what it could look like. Option one, I come and do a 1-day thing if that's all the time you have. And that this is what I would do if it's just 1 day. If you have time to have me for 2 days, then I would do this. And I very briefly, like 1 or 2 sentences, kind of laid it out for them. And then that way they feel a sense of kind of control and a little bit of an ownership as well, so that they know what's going on in their classroom, like or what you're planning to have go on in their classroom. Yeah, I don't know. Is that helpful?
Yes,
And
it
if
is.
you're not
Yeah.
sure, if you can't find one, like put it up a note in Discord. Everyone's been really helpful there. Send me an email. I usually just, because I've been doing this for so many years, I'm like, oh yeah, I know an activity that would be good for that.
Awesome. I might bother you. But yeah, like that was my idea. Like once they share their units, like the plan for the year, I was gonna give them 1 or 2 options for each unit, like this the activity, so they can choose like which one they prefer, or if they have any other ideas, like they can like I have a meeting with them just to like bounce off, like, okay, how do you vision it? And then like
Yeah.
let's work on it together. So
Yeah,
thanks a
and you
lot.
have to do a bit of that refinement because the units are pretty broad. Like this one in grade 8 science, water systems. You're like, I kind of take that in a bunch of different ways, like different directions. So is there something specific you've done? You could also ask them, like, have you done things in the past? And maybe you can take like that as a starting point and then just build on it. Last year, for example, my son's tech teacher every spring did like a building, a design and build activity where they build a structure, and he had this whole program that he had done, but he was an online teacher. My son was in an online class last year. And so this teacher was struggling with that. He's like, I can't do it now. I can't do it this year because I'm online. And so I was able to take his initial idea and then just figure out a way to adapt it in a way that worked for him that year. So you could maybe do something similar, like tell me if you've done something in the past that you really like, and I can use that as a starting point and just build on it. Because what I tend to see is, and I'm generalizing, but the projects or lessons or activities that they do with the students historically tend to just be more focused on like the activity. They don't have a lot of story around it. So you can start to think about using that activity as just the starting point, and then how can you build a story around that kind of through the lens of engineering. So if it's, you know, a bridge building, I see lots of popsicle stick bridge building activities happening in schools. You can take that as the starting point and then do something fun, like add in like Dawn's idea of like pre-testing the beams. Put in some relevancy too is always really helpful. So maybe that activity you do in the spring when there's a lot of flooding. So you can talk to the kids about, yes, you know, you see this problem happening in the world, and you know, you're all going to be part of the engineering team, and we're going to solve this problem together. So you start to just build these layers that take it beyond just a bridge building activity. You know what I mean?
Yes, thank you so much. And I do really like Don's idea of like testing the view. It was so cool.
Yeah, that's never occurred to me before, Dawn, to like pre-test like elements of a building or whatever you're putting together. Like I really like that. All right. How are we doing for time? It's 12:45. Oh, here in Ontario. Sorry, Don. I know you're, where are you? Is it 11:45 or?
Uh, yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Amazing. Okay. Well, any other questions? Anything else you wanted to share? Thank you so much, everyone, for joining today. Hopefully, this has been helpful and got you thinking about some more things you can do with the kids.
Or maybe an interesting experience, maybe not so much related to scaling, but like one of the activities I just finished was crash barrier testing. It's about the barriers that are alongside the road to keep you from smashing into concrete abutments. And, in the presentation, I had originally thought to put some videos of the testing of crash barriers with cars smashing into barrels filled with sand and stuff like that. But eventually, it didn't work out, and I certainly wasn't going to put actual videos of real
Yeah.
cars smashing into stuff. It could be upsetting, but it was interesting. We did the activity, and during the activity, one of the students said, "I was actually in 2 car crashes," and at first, I guess I wasn't too prepared for what that conversation might be, but so I just let it slide. But yeah, I guess it's about. I thought if I actually had started including videos of car crashes, what might have been
Yeah.
the reaction from the student in that case. So it sort of got me thinking to be careful
Yeah.
about what you put in your materials. And
It's very true. Like you have to think beyond just the presentation or the activity itself. You're really creating an experience for those kids. So you have to put yourself in their shoes or think about the different types of reactions you may get. So that I mean that could that's something to think about when you're talking about crashes, right? Like there could be
yeah,
some kind of triggering like, oh my gosh, my family, whatever. You never know. Maybe a student like lost a parent or something, right? In a car crash. So you have to just be aware of it. There was a good story I heard from one of our other volunteers, and when she was doing in-person stuff a few years ago, she always liked to do a particular activity, and I apologize, I can't remember exactly what it was, but I do remember it was edible. So whatever they did, and then they'd do something, and then they would be able to eat it. And of course, she followed like proper restrictions and guidelines around the different kinds of food she could have at the school. But she realized that the timing of her activity and the students in her class, she had some students that were fasting during that time, and so they couldn't participate in the activity. So for her, that was like, oh, okay, that's something I need to think about. Like, really, who are these kids I'm talking to? What's their culture? What are they going through right now? Like, and how can I try and be as inclusive as possible? So, like, unfortunately, those students missed out. And I know she's done the activity again in other years, and she's just done it at a different time of the year, right? So these are the things you kind of learn as you go, and again, to just say, you're with this class for the whole year, so you have time to go in and learn these things and create these relationships and connections in ways that just aren't possible when you just go in and out, kind of, right? Like a one-stop shop sort of model.
yeah, it's hard to predict. I know here in
Yeah.
Manitoba, it was the Manitoba School Science Symposium, and one of the projects was a trebuchet or like a catapult,
Mhm.
and it became a media event. Well, about kids making weapons and the
Oh,
controversy of it. So I don't know if similar things happened in Ontario, but I was surprised that became a hot topic actually about
interesting.
kids making weapons, and yet there's so many nice lessons out there about making a catapult that could be
There
fun
are.
to do.
I've done catapult activities.
And so remembering that, I'm sort of staying away from those ones. And I don't know if
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, good to know like your local environment, what it's like. And I think it has to do with context too. Like if you put the right context around it, like you have to, yeah, you have to be careful because yeah, you never know.
you never know. Yeah.
But that's why I think if you're coming at it from the position of trying to just create this experience for the students, you're not trying to, you're coming from a place of support and having people's best interests. So
Mhm.
we can only do the best we can, right?
Yeah.
All right. Okay. Anything else? Any other? Evan, do you think you're close to being able to connect with your?
Hopefully. Yeah, I guess what I've taken away from this is because that school is slightly different and it's so driven by each student, getting not just asking what the curriculum is from the teacher, but getting the what projects are they all working on to try and see if there's that common thread like between them would be really useful to try and develop activities.
Yeah, you might want to go more with like something like here's an activity, and you could pick anything, and
Hmm.
maybe you center it around teamwork because as engineers we need to work in teams, and so here's a team building type activity. Or another one that comes to mind for me is like the engineering design process. This is the engineering design process. Now we're going to do an activity, and I want you to use the engineering design process in your activities, and then it doesn't
Yeah,
matter what the activity is, right?
exactly. I was trying to get down to those like foundational processes. Problem solving was the one that came to mind for me too. But yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
yeah.
Try and get it focused on those fundamentals.
Yeah, and then you can have a lot of fun with it. Like what's just something that's really relevant to you. And when I did this filter building activity, I tried to let the kids know, I worked for many, many years in the pharmaceutical industry. So for us, kind of trying to connect the dots from like for us having not just clean water, sterile water was really important, and this is how we did it. And that's personal to me. So they can then look at me and be like, oh, this is a real person who actually is using this in real life. So maybe there's something you can, have fun and find an activity. If your focus is more broad or kind of those underlying skills, you can focus the activity more on something that's just really relevant for you or the students. If there's something
Right.
that is going on in their school or in the community, you can focus it on that, and then it I think it has a really neat impact then.
Absolutely.
Great. Okay, well, as always, I am always here to help. So please feel free to reach out at any time. I know some of you are already on Discord, but Discord is, we're getting more and more people that are joining. So I'm seeing some good chats back and forth there. So that's a good place to stay kind of connected. And the library of lessons. So if you do try something and it works out really well, as I did with you, Dawn, I would be encouraging you to think about adding that lesson to our library so that other volunteers can use it as a source of inspiration too. So I'll wrap up there. I hope that was helpful, and I look forward to hearing how it goes for you, Amanat, and Evan. And Dawn, I'm always excited to hear about what you're doing in the class. Thank you for sharing what you're doing. Dawn, you're pretty active on our Discord server, so thanks for that. All right, I'm gonna stop my recording.